The sound of bombs echoed through the broken city of Seoul as Subin checked her weapons one last time. Her hands moved quickly, loading her gun and making sure her knives were ready. After 10 years of training, these movements felt as natural as breathing. "Target confirmed," said Captain Han through her earpiece. "The creature is in the east area, moving north. You can attack now." Subin did not speak back. She just tapped her earpiece twice to show she understood. Words were not needed in the field. The Hunter Corps had taught her to be deadly and efficient, removing anything that was not useful. She moved through what was once an office building, making no sound despite the broken glass and concrete on the floor. The alien invasion had destroyed much of the city in the first attack, before humans found ways to fight back. Now, 8 years later, neither side was winning. Humans fought in small groups throughout Earth's cities, and the aliens could not take complete control. The aliens, called the Mock by humans, had come without warning or clear reason. Attempts to talk with them had failed. All that was left was fighting to survive. Subin stopped at a broken window, her enhanced eyes looking across the war-torn landscape. Seoul had once been beautiful, with tall glass and steel buildings reaching to the sky. Now it was a place of death, with light coming only from small fires and the occasional flying robot. Her target was a commander-class Mach, one of the larger, smarter types. Reports said it had been hurt in a recent fight with human forces and separated from its group. This was a rare chance. Commander-class Mach usually had many guards. A shadow moved between fallen buildings, large and careful. Subin's enhanced eyes focused on the shape. It was 2 meters tall even while hunched over, with the typical armored shell and multiple arms. Definitely a commander class, and it was hurt. Subin could see how it walked oddly, favoring its right side. Something had pierced its shell near what seemed to be a shoulder. Dark liquid leaked from the wound, leaving a trail that normal eyes would not see. Her training took over. Find, identify, kill. The rules were clear. Commander-class Mach were top targets, to be killed without delay or mercy. They were the leaders in the alien command structure, and each one killed was a big blow to enemy abilities. Subin raised her gun, the targeting system connecting with her brain implants to show the perfect shot. One clean shot through what research had found to be the central nerve cluster would end it quickly. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then the Mach did something unexpected. It stopped, seemingly in pain, and lowered itself to the ground. One of its arms reached awkwardly for the wound, trying to stop the flow of liquid. The movement was so familiar, so common to all wounded creatures. Subin paused, her trained reflexes briefly stopped by this sight. In that gesture, she saw something she had never expected to see in the enemy: weakness and pain. She pushed the thought away. Feeling was as useless as words. She steadied her aim again, breathing out slowly. The Mach turned its head, and despite the alien body, despite everything she had been taught about these creatures being completely different and hostile, Subin could have sworn it looked directly at her, aware of what was about to happen. Her finger froze on the trigger. Subin's mind raced. This was not how missions were supposed to go. 10 years of training had prepared her for this moment. Find the target, kill the target, return for the next mission. Simple, clear. No room for doubt. Yet doubt had found its way in. The Mach remained still, its body language showing pain. Subin had studied Mach behavior patterns extensively. They were supposed to be ruthless fighters, never showing weakness, never surrendering. This one was different. Hunter 7, report status. Captain Han's voice came through her earpiece again, sharper now. Have you eliminated the target? Subin swallowed hard. This was her first hesitation in 5 years of active duty. Her record was perfect. 23. Kills, all clean, all confirmed. The Hunter Corps valued that perfect record. They had molded her into one of their best. Minor complication, she responded, keeping her voice flat. Adjusting position. Work quickly, Han ordered. Patrols will be in that sector within 30 minutes. Subin acknowledged and went silent again. She studied the wounded mock through her scope. Its breathing seemed labored. The dark fluid, what passed for blood among the mock, continued to leak from the wound. Research had shown that the fluid carried essential nutrients and oxygen to mock tissues. Too much loss would be fatal, just like human blood. Subin moved slightly, getting a better angle on the target. As she did, a small piece of concrete dislodged from her position, falling to the street below with a faint sound. The mock's head turned sharply toward the noise. It tried to stand, reaching for what appeared to be a weapon embedded in its shell, but the movement caused more fluid to flow from the wound. It made a strange hissing sound and collapsed again. In that moment, Subin saw fear. Not the mindless aggression that the military briefings had described, but fear, a universal response to being wounded and vulnerable in enemy territory. Her training told her to take the shot now, while the target was distracted by pain. The neural targeting system in her implants highlighted the kill zone again, showing a 98% chance of a clean kill. Subin's finger rested on the trigger, ready to apply the small pressure that would end the mock commander's life. But another thought had taken root in her mind. In 8 years of war, humans had never captured a live commander-class mock. All their knowledge came from studying dead specimens. What could they learn from a living one? That was the rational thought, the professional justification. But deeper, beneath layers of training designed to remove emotion, was something else, a recognition of pain in another living being, and a reluctance to add to it. Hunter 7, time is critical. Report status, Han demanded through the comm. Subin made her decision. She lowered her rifle and reached for the medical kit at her belt. Standard issue for long missions, it contained basics for treating human wounds in the field. Would any of it work on alien biology? She had no idea. Target location compromised, she lied into her comm. Moving to secondary position for clean shot. As she spoke, she was already descending from her perch, moving silently through the ruins toward the wounded alien. Every step went against her training, against orders, against the entire war effort. But some instinct deeper than training pulled her forward. Some part of her that the Hunter Corps had failed to erase completely. She approached the mock from behind, her footsteps silent on the debris-covered ground. At 10 meters distance, she set down her rifle and raised her empty hands. I must be out of my mind, she whispered to herself. The mock sensed her presence and turned, its many eyes focusing on her human form. Recognition. Enemy. But it did not attack. Perhaps it couldn't. Or perhaps, like her, it sensed that this moment could be different. Subin took another step forward, medical kit in hand. I'm not going to hurt you, she said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the alien but hoping the tone might. Hunter 7. Report status. Captain Han's voice came through Subin's earpiece, sounding impatient. Do you see the target? Subin's throat felt dry. Yes. Target is in sight. Then finish your mission, Hunter. The mock had not moved. It stayed, in a half-crouched position, one arm pressed against its wound. Subin's enhanced senses detected the faint sounds it was making, a low sound that human research had identified as a call for help. No help would come. This area had been cleared of mock forces 3 days earlier, with only this commander and maybe a few others left behind during their rushed retreat. Subin's training said to pull the trigger. Simple, clean. One less enemy commander to plan attacks against human settlements. One step closer to pushing the invaders off Earth. But something was wrong. Commander-class mock never separated from their units by choice. They were the tactical centers, the leaders. This one should have been in the middle of the retreat, surrounded by guards. Unless it had been left behind. Abandoned. Subin lowered her rifle slightly, curious despite her training. The mock's actions did not match normal patterns. It seemed to be trying to treat its own wound rather than calling for rescue. That suggested either a big change in mock behavior, or... Hunter 7. Why have you not attacked? Han's voice had a warning tone. Subin made a decision that would change everything. Target is in a position that prevents a clean kill, she lied, moving to a better spot. She turned off her location tracker, another violation of rules, and moved from her hiding place in the ruins. Years of stealth training allowed her to circle around the wounded mock, approaching from a blind spot in its sensory array. From this closer position, she could see the wound more clearly. Something had punctured the shell and torn into the softer tissues beneath. The fluid leaking out was a deep blue-black, thick and apparently important, given the mock's attempts to contain it. The creature suddenly stiffened, sensing her presence despite her caution. It tried to rise, reaching for what she recognized as a weapon embedded in its shell, but the movement caused a fresh surge of fluid from the wound. The mock made a sound, a rattling hiss that her translation implant could not interpret, and collapsed again. Subin raised her rifle, the neural targeting system giving her a perfect shot at the exposed nerve cluster. One squeeze of the trigger, and her mission would be complete. The hunter corps had been clear. The only good mock was a dead mock. They were hostile, alien, impossible to understand. The enemy. But they had never been this close to capturing a living commander-class specimen. The intelligence value alone could be huge. That's what Subin told herself as she made her choice, knowing deep down there was something more driving her decision, something her training had supposedly removed. Compassion. She lowered her rifle and reached instead for the medical kit on her belt. Standard issue for long missions meant for human biology but perhaps adaptable. I must be crazy, she muttered as she took a step toward the wounded alien. The mock's sensory appendages turned toward her, its posture tensing despite its injury. It recognized her as human, as the enemy. Yet it did not try to attack again, perhaps too weak or perhaps waiting to see what she would do. Subin raised her empty hands slowly. I'm not going to hurt you, she said, knowing the words meant nothing to the creature but hoping the tone might communicate something. Her earpiece crackled again. Hunter 7, respond immediately or we will consider you compromised. Subin reached up and removed the earpiece entirely, dropping it to the ground and crushing it beneath her boot. There was no going back now. The mock watched her, its multiple, eye-like organs tracking her movements as she slowly approached. Subin kept her hands visible, moving with deliberate care. One wrong move could trigger the alien's defensive instincts, and even wounded, a commander-class mock could tear a human apart with its powerful limbs. Subin stopped 2 meters from the alien and slowly knelt, setting her medical kit on the ground. She opened it, keeping her movements slow and visible. Inside were basic supplies, bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, clotting agents designed for human blood. Would any of this help in alien physiology? Subin had no idea, but she had to try. The mock made a series of clicking sounds, its sensory appendages focusing intently on the medical kit. It seemed curious, or at least not immediately hostile. I'm going to try to help you, Subin said, keeping her voice steady. But you need to stay still. She selected a clotting agent from the kit. Human research had determined that mock fluid served a similar function to human blood, carrying nutrients and oxygen through their bodies. If that was true, perhaps a human clotting agent might slow the bleeding. Subin moved forward cautiously, the clotting agent in hand. The mock tensed, but did not attack. When she was within arm's reach, Subin hesitated. This was the moment of greatest danger. She was well within the creature's strike range. Slowly, telegraphing her movements, she reached toward the wound. The mock vibrated slightly but remained still. Subin applied the clotting agent to the edge of the wound. The reaction was immediate. The mock's entire body stiffened, and a high-pitched sound emanated from somewhere in its torso. Subin froze, certain she had made a fatal mistake. But after a moment, the mock relaxed slightly. The flow of dark fluid from the wound noticeably slowed. It's working, Subin whispered, surprised and relieved. She applied more of the clotting agent, then reached for a bandage. The wound was large, but she could at least cover it partially. As she worked, the strangeness of the situation struck her. Just 20 minutes ago, she had been prepared to kill this creature without hesitation. Now she was treating its wounds as she might those of a fellow human soldier. The mock remained surprisingly cooperative, moving slightly to give her better access to the wound. Was it simply responding to the relief from pain, or did it understand she was trying to help? Subin couldn't tell. When she had done all she could with her limited supplies, Subin sat back on her heels. The bleeding had mostly stopped, and the bandage seemed to be holding. The mock's breathing, or whatever equivalent process it used, seemed less labored. "That's the best I can do," Subin said. "I don't know if it's enough." The mock made a series of low sounds and moved one of its limbs in what almost seemed like a gesture of gratitude. Subin couldn't be sure. Everything she knew about mock behavior came from combat situations. No one had ever described peaceful interaction with one. Now, what? Subin couldn't take the mock back to a human base. It would be killed immediately. She couldn't leave it here. Either it would die from its wounds or be found by human patrols. And she couldn't return to her unit. The moment she had decided not to kill the mock, she had become a deserter. Subin looked around at the ruins surrounding them. They needed shelter, somewhere they could hide while she figured out what to do next. There was an underground parking structure about half a kilometer away that had survived the bombing relatively intact. It would provide cover from aerial drones and patrols. "We need to move," Subin said, gesturing to indicate their need to leave. "It's not safe here." The mock seemed to understand. It attempted to rise, moving slowly and carefully to avoid reopening the wound. Subin hesitated, then stepped forward to help support its weight. The alien was heavy, its exoskeleton solid and dense, but it could move under its own power with her assistance. Together they began making their way through the ruins, an unprecedented alliance in a war that had known only enemies. Subin knew that both humans and mock would consider this collaboration treason of the highest order. The penalty would be death if they were discovered. Yet as they moved slowly through the shattered landscape of what had once been a thriving city, Subin felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The sense that she was making a choice of her own, not one programmed into her by the Hunter Corps. For the first time since the war began, Subin was following her own conscience rather than her orders. Whether that choice would lead to salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But it was her choice, and somehow that made all the difference. The first 24 hours were the most dangerous. Subin had found an underground parking structure mostly intact. It was easy to defend and had many escape routes. She had half-carried, half-dragged the wounded mock commander into this safe place, every instinct telling her she was making a terrible mistake. The mock had stayed strangely calm during the journey, either from weakness or careful thinking. Subin kept her gun ready, expecting betrayal at any moment. But the creature seemed to understand on some level that she was trying to help. Now, in the dim light of her tactical lamp, Subin studied the alien before her. The mock commander was even larger up close, its hard shell reflecting the light in subtle rainbow patterns. The wound continued to leak dark fluid despite her attempts to seal it with medical patches. Human medical science knew very little about mock biology. Most specimens were studied after being killed in combat. No one had ever tried to treat one. "I don't know if this will help or kill you," Subin muttered as she prepared a universal clotting agent from her med kit. It was designed to work with many types of human blood, but alien biology was something else entirely. The mock watched her movements with multiple sensory organs that Subin couldn't quite understand. Was it curious? Planning? In pain? The alien face, if you could call it that, was impossible to read. Subin applied the clotting agent to the wound. The mock stiffened, a vibration coming from deep within its body, but it didn't attack. Gradually, the leaking fluid slowed. "That's something, at least," Subin said, more to herself than her unlikely patient. She had disabled all her tracking devices, but the Hunter Corps would be searching for her already. Desertion was not allowed, especially with high-value targets involved. She needed to keep moving, but the mock commander was in no condition to travel far. As Subin considered her limited options, the mock suddenly moved, causing her to jump back and reach for her weapon. But instead of attacking, it was extending one of its limbs toward her face. Subin held still, heart pounding, as the alien limb, surprisingly delicate up close, hovered near her temple. Then it made contact, gentle but deliberate. A strange tingling feeling spread across Subin's skin, followed by a pressure inside her head that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't comfortable either. Images flashed through her mind. Stars seen from unfamiliar angles, massive structures orbiting, distant suns, creatures like and unlike the Mach moving in organized patterns. Subin gasped, understanding dawning. The Mach was communicating, not with words, but with impressions, memories, concepts transferred directly. The contact broke, leaving Subin dizzy but with new understanding. The Mach commanders weren't just military leaders, they were keepers of collective knowledge, carrying the gathered experiences of their kind, and this one was showing her its memories. "You're trying to talk to me," Subin whispered, amazed. The Mach's sensory appendages adjusted, focusing on her more intently. It extended the limb again, clearly inviting. Subin hesitated. The military would consider this contact a security breach of the highest order. But she had already crossed that line. More importantly, this might be the first real communication between humans and Mach since the invasion began. She leaned forward, allowing the contact. This time she was somewhat prepared for the alien presence in her mind and tried to focus, to understand. More images came. Mach ships approaching Earth. First meetings with humans, growing conflict. But there was something wrong about the sequence, something that contradicted the official history Subin had been taught. In these memories, the first shots came from human vessels. The Mach had approached with another purpose, one lost in the chaos that followed. When the connection broke again, Subin was breathing hard, her mind racing. "That's not what happened," she insisted, but doubt had taken root. The entire war had proceeded on the assumption that the Mach were naturally hostile invaders. What if that basic idea was wrong? The Mach made a series of clicking sounds and gestured to its wound, then to the medical supplies Subin had used. It seemed to be drawing a parallel, healing instead of harming, cooperation instead of conflict. Subin sat back, the implications overwhelming. If what the Mach had shown her contained even a small truth, the entire war might be based on a tragic misunderstanding, continued by the inability of either side to communicate. And now, against all odds, communication had begun. A distant explosion reminded Subin of their dangerous situation. The Hunter Corps would be closing in, and they would show no mercy to a deserter, especially one apparently working with the enemy. "We need to move," Subin said, gesturing to indicate their danger. "Can you walk?" The Mach commander rose with difficulty, steadier than before but still favoring its injured side. It bent its upper body in what Subin interpreted as a nod. They had to find somewhere safer, somewhere they could continue this fragile dialogue. And Subin knew they would need help, human help, from someone willing to listen rather than shoot. She thought of her old friend Jin Ho, a communications specialist who had been developing translation systems for potential use with the Mach. The military had shut down his research, deeming it irrelevant to the war effort, but Jin Ho had continued in secret, believing that understanding was the path to peace. If anyone would help them, it would be Jin Ho. But reaching him meant crossing kilometers of war-torn Seoul, evading both human patrols and any remaining Mach forces that might not share this commander's apparent willingness to communicate. Subin gathered her supplies, mind made up. "Come, on," she said to the Mach, gesturing toward the exit. "We're going to try something that's probably impossible." The alien followed, and together they ventured into the ruins, an unprecedented alliance in a war that had known only enemies. The journey through the destroyed city was slow and dangerous. They moved only at night, hiding during daylight hours. Subin's training proved valuable as she guided them through patrol routes and around drone surveillance patterns. The Mach, despite its injury, showed remarkable adaptability, learning quickly to follow Subin's silent hand signals. On the second night, they had a close call. A military drone passed directly overhead while they were crossing an exposed street. Subin froze, pulling the Mach into the shadow of a collapsed wall. The drone hovered for a moment, its sensors sweeping the area. Subin held her breath, certain they would be detected. Then the Mach did something unexpected. It extended a limb and touched the ground. A faint pulse of energy spread outward, barely visible even to Subin's enhanced vision. The drone's lights flickered momentarily, and then it moved on as if it had seen nothing. Subin looked at the Mach in surprise. "You can interfere with our technology?" The Mach made a gesture that Subin was beginning to recognize as affirmation. This revelation raised troubling questions. If the Mach had such capabilities, why hadn't they used them more effectively in the war? How much of what humans thought they knew about the aliens was wrong? During rest periods, the Mach would initiate more mental contacts, sharing glimpses of its world and culture. Subin learned that the Mach lived in collective groups, sharing knowledge and experiences through the same kind of mental connection. Their society valued harmony and consensus, with commanders serving as living libraries rather than just military leaders. Nothing in human intelligence reports had suggested any of this. In return, Subin found herself sharing her own memories of Soul before the war, of her training, of the fear and hatred that had driven humanity's response to the Mach arrival. She wasn't sure how much the alien understood, but the exchange felt important, a bridge being built between two vastly different forms of life. By the fourth night, they were approaching the university district, where Jin-Ho had his hidden lab. The Mach's wound was healing slowly but steadily, and it moved with greater ease. "We're almost there," Subin told it as they rested in the shell of what had once been a hospital. "My friend might be able to help us communicate better. If he doesn't, shoot you on sight." The Mach made a sound that Subin had started to associate with understanding. After a moment, it reached out again with its communication limb, offering another connection. Subin accepted without hesitation now, the initial strangeness of the mental contact having faded with repetition. This time, instead of memories, she received something that felt like hope, a concept so universal that it needed no translation. In that moment, Subin understood that what they were attempting wasn't just about survival or ending a war. It was about proving that fundamentally different beings could find common ground, could choose understanding over fear. As dawn approached, they prepared to make the final leg of their journey to Jin-Ho's lab. The sky was lightening in the east, the ruins of Seoul taking shape around them. "One more night," Subin said, pointing to where they would hide for the day ahead. "Then we find out if I made the right choice after all." The Mach followed her gaze, then turned its sensory organs back to her. It made a gesture with its uninjured limbs that Subin had never seen before, complex and deliberate. She didn't understand its meaning, but somehow she sensed its importance. Something new was being created between them, something that might change everything, if they lived long enough to share it with others. The journey to Jin-Ho's hidden lab took 3 difficult days. Subin and the Mach commander, whom she had started thinking of as blue for the color of its fluid, moved only at night, hiding during daylight hours from the increasingly intensive search patterns of the Hunter Corps. Twice they narrowly avoided patrols. Once they were spotted by a reconnaissance drone, forcing them to change course drastically. All the while, the bond between them deepened through brief mental contacts that left Subin with fragmentary but compelling insights into Mach culture and history. By the time they reached the abandoned university research building where Jin-Ho had established his unauthorized lab, Subin was convinced of one thing. The war was based on a catastrophic error, continued by the inability of either side to recognize the other's attempts at communication. "This is crazy even by your standards, Subin," Jin-Ho said after his initial shock had subsided. He kept glancing nervously at Blue, who stood motionless in the corner of the lab, sensory appendages taking in every detail of the cluttered space. "Do you know what they will do to us if they find out you have brought a live commander here?" "I know exactly what they will do," Subin replied grimly. "But this is more important than our safety. Jin-Ho, they have been trying to communicate from the beginning, we just could not understand." Jin-Ho ran a hand through his messy hair. "The military has intercepted countless Mach transmissions. None of them contained anything resembling peaceful messages. Because we are interpreting everything through the lens of warfare, Subin insisted. Blue has shown me memories of the first contact. Their approach was not an invasion, it was an arrival. We fired first. Jinho looked skeptical. That contradicts everything we have been told. Of course it does. You think the military would admit they started an interspecies war through a misunderstanding? It is easier to paint the mock as mindless invaders. Blue moved forward then, its massive form making Jinho step back instinctively. The mock extended its communication limb toward the translator equipment that filled one wall of the lab. I think it wants to use your system, Subin suggested. Jinho hesitated, then nodded. It is not designed for direct interface with mock physiology, but... He adjusted several settings on the main console. Let us see what happens. Blue connected to the system, and the screens filled with data streams too rapid for human eyes to follow. Jinho worked frantically at the controls trying to process the information flood. After several minutes, the system stabilized, and a synthesized voice emerged from the speakers. Reconciliation, understanding, cooperation. These concepts translate approximately from our communication. For 8 cycles, we have attempted dialogue. Your species interprets all signals as aggression. Subin and Jinho exchanged stunned glances. Why did you come to Earth? Jinho asked carefully. There was a pause as the system processed. Resource depletion on home system worlds required expansion. Earth identified as compatible but inhabited. Protocol dictates consultation with indigenous intelligent species before settlement. Approach was diplomatic. First response was weapon fire. The stark simplicity of the explanation hit Subin like a physical blow. 8 years of devastating war, millions dead on both sides, Earth cities in ruins, all because of a misinterpretation. If that is true, why continue fighting once it was clear we saw you as invaders? Jinho challenged. Defensive protocols activated after initial attack. Command structure fragmented without consensus. Some factions favor continued conflict. Others seek resolution. Unity is lost. This one represents reconciliation faction. Subin's mind raced. That is why you were abandoned, wounded in the field. Your own people left you behind because you favor peace. Affirmative. This one designated defective for questioning continuation of conflict. The revelation stunned both humans. Not only had the war started from a misunderstanding, but the mock themselves were divided on its continuation. Blue's faction wanted peace but was being suppressed by more militant elements within their own command structure. We need to take this information to someone who can actually do something with it, Subin said. Someone with the authority to initiate real communication at a higher level. Jinho looked doubtful. The military will not listen. They are committed to total victory, whatever the cost. Then we go above them. The Civilian Oversight Committee still has influence. Director Park has questioned the military's handling of the conflict for years. Getting to her will not be easy. The Hunter Corps has you marked as a deserter, probably a traitor by now, and traveling with a mock commander. Jinho shook his head. We have to try. Subin turned to Blue. Will you come with us? To meet with humans who might listen? The synthesized voice responded after a moment's processing. This one will attempt communication. Risk is acceptable if possibility of ending conflict exists. Jinho sighed, then began gathering equipment. I will come too. You will need my translation system, and someone needs to make sure you do not get yourself killed doing something noble and stupid. Subin smiled for the first time in days. Thank you. As they prepared to leave, Blue initiated one more mental contact with Subin. This time, instead of memories, Subin received something that felt like gratitude. And something else, harder to define, a sense of shared purpose that transcended the differences between their species. In that moment, Subin understood that what they were attempting was not just about ending a war. It was about proving that fundamentally different beings could find common ground, could choose understanding over fear, healing over destruction. It was the most human thing she had ever done. The plan they developed was daring but dangerous. The headquarters of the Civilian Oversight Committee was located in what had once been the National Assembly building, now fortified and partially underground. Getting there meant crossing the most heavily guarded zone in Seoul. The main challenge will be getting past the outer security perimeter, Jinho explained, showing a rough map on his tablet. After that, we need to reach Director Park directly, before military security can intervene. How do we get past the perimeter? Subin asked. Jinho smiled thinly. I have been working on something that might help. A modification of mock communication, patterns that our systems read as friendly identifier codes. You hacked military IFF systems? Subin was impressed despite the danger. Not exactly hacked. More like confused. It will not work for long, but it might get us close enough. Blue, who had been absorbing their conversation through Jinho's translation system, made a series of sounds that the system interpreted as, "This one can assist with technological interference at critical moment." Subin nodded. Good, we will need every advantage. They spent the night gathering supplies and making preparations. Jinho packed his portable translation system and several other devices Subin did not recognize. Subin checked her weapons, brought, not for offensive use but as a last resort if things went wrong. Blue seemed to understand the gravity of what they were attempting. It maintained a still vigilance, conserving energy for the journey ahead. As dawn approached, Jinho received an alert on his monitoring system. Hunter Corp search patterns have intensified in this sector. They must have picked up traces of mock biosignatures. We need to move now. They slipped out through a service tunnel that Jinho had prepared as an emergency exit, emerging 2 blocks away in the basement of a collapsed shopping center. From there, they would need to travel 5 kilometers through the ruins to reach the edge of the government security zone. As they moved cautiously through the pre-dawn gloom, Subin reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her here. One decision, not to pull a trigger, had completely changed the course of her life and perhaps the course of the war itself. Do you think Director Park will actually listen to us? Jinho asked quietly, as they paused to let a drone patrol pass overhead. She has to, Subin replied. The alternative is continuing a war that should never have started in the first place. Blue made a soft sound that the translator rendered simply as hope. Subin nodded. Hope was all they had. Hope that enough people on both sides wanted peace more than they wanted victory. That understanding could overcome fear. That hands trained to destroy could learn to heal instead. It was a fragile thing to build a mission on. But sometimes Subin thought the most important journeys begin with the most fragile of hopes. The headquarters of the Civilian Oversight Committee was located in what had once been the National Assembly building, now fortified and partially underground. Getting there meant crossing the most heavily guarded zone in Seoul, where both human and automated security systems would shoot first and never bother with questions. Subin, Jinho, and Blue had spent a week planning their approach, using Subin's knowledge of military protocols and Jinho's ability to hack surveillance systems. But the final phase required something none of them had anticipated: surrender. This is insane, Jinho muttered as Subin carefully removed her weapons and placed them on the ground. They were at the edge of the security perimeter, hidden for the moment but soon to be very visible. They will shoot us before we can explain. Not if we follow protocol exactly, Subin replied, though her own confidence was forced. A hunter approaching under flag of truce with critical intelligence will get an audience. It is procedure. And the 7-foot alien with you? Subin looked at Blue, who stood calmly despite the danger. That is the intelligence. Jinho shook his head but continued setting up his portable translation system. If we die, I am blaming you in whatever afterlife we end up in. Subin smiled tightly. Noted. She activated the emergency broadcast frequency on her backup comm unit. This is Hunter 7, authorization code Lima Echo 97 Delta, approaching Southwest checkpoint under flag of truce with critical intelligence. Repeat, Hunter 7 approaching under flag of truce. The response was immediate. Hunter 7, you are designated deserter and traitor. Surrender for immediate detention. Affirmative on surrender. Be advised, I am accompanied by a mock commander. Under my control and a civilian specialist. The commander contains intelligence vital to Director Park and the Oversight Committee. Request secure escort directly to Director Park. There was a long pause. Subin could almost hear the confusion and rapid consultations her request must have sparked. Finally, approach with hands visible. Any hostile movement will result in immediate termination. Here goes nothing, Subin said, standing and raising her hands. Jinho followed suit, and Blue mimicked the gesture with its upper limbs, understanding the importance of the body language. They walked slowly toward the checkpoint, where heavily armed soldiers had taken position, weapons aimed directly at them. Subin kept her face calm despite the hammering of her heart. Everything depended on following procedure to the letter, giving them no excuse to shoot. Halt, commanded the checkpoint officer as they came within 20 meters. Hunter 7, confirm your identity. Subin stood perfectly still. Specialist Subin, Hunter Corps Division 7, service number 1194-2218A. A scanner was aimed at her face, confirming her biometrics. The officer nodded, then his eyes widened as he fully registered Blue's presence. What is that doing here? Unrestrained. It is not hostile, Subin said carefully. It is here voluntarily with critical intelligence for Director Park. This is a first contact scenario, sir. Protocol demands escalation to civilian oversight. The mention of protocol gave the officer pause. Military discipline was built on following established procedures, and while everything about this situation was unprecedented, the reference to first contact protocols provided a framework he could understand. After a tense standoff and several communications up the chain of command, they were finally escorted, under heavy guard and with weapons trained on Blue at all times, into the compound and down to the secure levels where the Oversight Committee operated. Director Park was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She listened without interruption as Subin explained everything. Her decision not to kill Blue, their rudimentary communication, the revelations about the war's origins, and Blue's status as part of a peace-seeking faction among the Mock. When Subin finished, Park turned to Jinho. And your translation system allows direct communication? Jinho nodded. It is imperfect but functional. The more we use it, the better it becomes at interpreting mock communication patterns. Park studied Blue thoughtfully. I want to hear directly from our guest. Jinho activated the system, and Blue connected to it. The synthesized voice filled the room. This one represents those who seek end to conflict. Original approach to Earth was diplomatic. Misunderstanding led to violence. Continuation of conflict serves neither species. Coexistence is possible. If what you say is true, Park said carefully, why has there been no attempt at communication from your leadership? Unity is broken among Mock. Dominant faction believes humans only understand force. This one's faction silenced. Designated, defective but growing. Truth of first contact suppressed on both sides. Park turned to an aide. Get me the records of the first engagement with the Mock ships. All of it, including the communications logs that were classified. Ma'am, those are sealed by military command, which is subject to civilian oversight in matters of first contact. Get them, now. Hours later, in a secure conference room, Park, Subin, Jinho, and several committee members reviewed the evidence. The classified records confirmed what Blue had shown Subin. The human military had indeed fired first, interpreting the Mock approach formation as attack positioning. The Mock attempts at communication had been dismissed as electronic warfare. 8 years of war, Park said quietly. Millions dead. Earth's cities in ruins. All because we could not recognize an attempt at dialogue. The question is what we do now, said one of the committee members. The military will not easily accept this narrative. They are committed to victory through force. And there are clearly Mock factions that feel the same way, Subin added. Blue's people left it to die because it advocated for peace. Park looked at Blue. Can you contact others like you, other Mock who want to end this conflict? The synthesized voice replied, "Possible. Communication channels exist that dominant faction does not monitor. Numbers unknown but significant." "Then that is where we start," Park decided. "A parallel peace initiative, bypassing the hardliners on both sides. If we can establish direct communication with the reconciliation faction, prove that coexistence is possible." "It will not be easy," Subin warned. "The Hunter Corps and military command will resist any narrative that contradicts the one they have been fighting for. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy, Specialist." Park's expression was determined. "But I would rather fight for a difficult peace than an endless war." In the weeks that followed, Subin found herself at the center of an unprecedented diplomatic initiative. Jinho's translation system was refined and expanded. Blue made contact with other reconciliation faction Mach through hidden communication channels. Slowly, cautiously, a dialogue began. There were setbacks. Hardliners on both sides attempted to sabotage the talks. There was violence, accusations of treason, deep resistance to changing the narrative of the conflict. But there were also breakthroughs. The first joint human-Mach statement. The first tentative ceasefire in a limited zone. The first public acknowledgement that the war might have begun in error. 6 months after Subin had made the decision not to pull the trigger, she stood at the edge of what had once been a battlefield and was now the site of the first official human-Mach diplomatic meeting. Blue stood beside her, now recognized by both species as a pioneer of peace. "When I found you wounded that day," Subin said quietly, "I never imagined we would end up here." Blue extended a communication limb, and Subin accepted the now familiar mental contact. The impression she received was not of words but of a concept, that the most important journeys begin with choices that seem small at the time. The choice to lower a weapon, the choice to heal instead of harm. The war was not over. There were still battles being fought in distant sectors, still those on both sides who refused to accept the possibility of peace. But something fundamental had changed, something that could never be undone. Humans and Mach had begun to truly see each other, not as monsters, but as different forms of life with the shared capacity for both violence and compassion. Subin watched as the diplomatic teams assembled, human and Mach, former enemies now cautiously exploring how to become something else. All because she had made a choice that day in the ruins, a choice that went against everything she had been trained to do. Her hands had been trained to end life, but in choosing to heal instead, she had begun something new. "Ready?" Jinho asked, approaching with the latest version of his translation system. Subin nodded, feeling Blue's presence beside her, no longer alien, no longer enemy, but ally, friend. "Ready," she said, and together they walked toward the future they had made possible.